Okay. We were talking about the matzah. We were talking about the special nature of the shmura matzah, which is the matzah the Alter Rebbe is referring to. The Alter Rebbe, when I say Alter Rebbe, that is the author of this discourse, who is the founder of the Chabad movement. And he's called the Alter Rebbe, meaning the older rabbi, you see, because that's what you'll call the founder of many movements. So you may have heard of the Musar movement. So you have one of the founders is called the Alter of Slobodka, the older rabbi of Slobodka.
Oh.
So you have the word alter is it means the older, right? Usually,
well, if it's more than one, they usually call them the elders.
Well, you have the elders. The elders is a little bit different, but in Yiddish, alter just means the older one, as opposed to the younger ones. So when the Alter Rebbe, when he was the Rebbe, they didn't call him the older rabbi.
No, he was young.
They called him the rabbi, the Rebbe. And then he had a son who succeeded him, and they called the son the Rebbe, and the previous Rebbe they called the Rebbe Nishmaso Eden, the Rebbe whose soul is in Gan Eden. Then they had the third Chabad Rebbe, the son-in-law of the second. Then they had a real problem. Now what are we going to call? What are we going to call the rabbis now? So the system became, they called the first Rebbe, they called him the Alter Rebbe. The second one they called the Mittler Rebbe, meaning the middle rabbi, right? And the third one was called the Rebbe. There you go. And those names stuck. I mean, the third Rebbe eventually became known by his work called the Tzemach Tzedek. But the Alter Rebbe and then the Mittler Rebbe, even though he's the number 2 out of 7, he's still called the middle rabbi. For that reason.
Unfortunately, we didn't get the fourth one.
The fourth one was the Rebbe Maharash, Morenu Harav Rabbeinu Shmuel.
Oh, yeah?
Who was the youngest son of the Tzemach Tzedek. And he was the Rebbe around 1860s or so.
So he was a grandson.
He was a great-grandson of the founder of the Chabad movement.
A great-grandson, okay.
Thank you, Rabbi. I want to get back to the text. It looks like we're in the middle of page 5. Is that correct? Right before the summary? Is that where we're starting? So we can get back on track?
We are starting. Thank you, Robert. You're great. We are on the bottom of page 5.
Okay, thank you.
These final 2 words here. And we were discussing the matzah. And I'd like to just mention regarding the matzah, that is, we've been talking about the spiritual power of this matzah. And, very interestingly, the point over here is not merely that the matzah is to remember, and the matzah is not just to commemorate and to symbolize, but the matzah actually becomes the same as the matzah that originally occurred, and its purpose was to infuse the Jewish people with faith. And this is akin to what we say at the Seder. We say matzah zu, this matzah, this very matzah that we're eating here at the Seder, why are we eating it, right? And we say the reason. And then we say, one of the answers to one of the sons is Ba'avur zeh. What the son is going to ask, why are you doing this? You're going to say Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeiti miMitzrayim. It's because of this. When you say this, you're pointing to something, right? This is this matzah that we're eating right here tonight, 3,300 years later. It's because of this that God took me out of Egypt. Well, God took me out of Egypt? Well, I was never in Egypt. No, but the idea is, as we say in the Haggadah, that we are experiencing, we are going through what the Jewish people went through again. Thank God we didn't have to be in Egypt, but spiritually speaking, we're going through that same process of redemption once again. We're not just remembering the redemption, we're going through the redemption again. And this matzah is not just a symbol. That's one way of looking at it, of course. But this matzah is the very matzah that gives us faith. It is the matzah that is the main ingredient is nothing. The nothingness that supersedes, the nothingness that transcends all of existence connected with the infinite light, as the Alter Rebbe describes. And these are actually there are two levels of matzah. We learned at the beginning of the discourse, we talked about matzot, spelled with a vav, the letter vav, or matzot spelled without the vav. We're going to see soon the Rebbe is going to tie it back to the original point here. So the lower level of matzah, which corresponds to the matzah eaten before midnight, requires protection. As it's written, and you shall watch over the matzot. This refers to the matzot that were to be eaten with the Paschal sacrifice before midnight. So we've been speaking the whole time here that there are two levels of matzot going on here. There's the matzot before midnight, and there's the matzot after midnight. The matzot, we said earlier that the matzot before midnight is our work, the work that we have of putting aside our negativity with our own effort, right? Our own impulse control, our own self-control to say, okay, God is here, God is watching me. I'm in the mood to do A, B, C, or I'm not in the mood to do E, F, G, but God is here and I'm going to do what God wants, putting aside our own will. That's the, so to speak, the heavy lifting that we do on our own. That's the matzah before midnight. But then we get the revelation of the Or Ein Sof, of the infinite light of God. So these are the two things the Rebbe is talking about. So the matzot before midnight, we'll call this before midnight, right? You have to watch over the matzot. They have to be protected from the influences of external forces. Basically, there's always external forces that are trying to draw nourishment from what we're doing. And, since these are coming from the lower level of our own work, they have to be protected. And here, Rabbi Tauger explains this refers to the forces of evil. They are called external because they're outside the realm of holiness. They derive nurture from the external dimensions of God's will. He doesn't desire them in an ultimate sense. Okay, the Alter Rebbe describes this in Tanya. We're not going to get into that. But Hashem created the world in such a way where everything that we do is always subject to these negative forces. So the matzah has to be protected. The matzah has to be watched over. That is, by the way, the word you may be familiar with, shemura matzah. Matzah that is guarded. Now you might ask, who wants to steal matzah? Matzah have to be shemura. Why does it have to be guarded?
Because nobody that touches chometz should be touching anything close. Okay, well, in the physical halachic sense, it means that the wheat, from the time that the wheat is harvested, it is guarded so that no water comes in contact with it. Right? We talk about chametz and we think about scrubbing the counters and scrubbing the everything and cleaning and covering and koshering, et cetera, that we do. But the thing in the house that has the greatest potential to become chametz is the matzah, because it is the mixture of flour and water, right? Flour is great, water is great. Put the two together, you get chametz. So when we say that the matzah is guarded, there is an actual halachic idea here, and that is that from the time that the wheat is harvested, it is put in a low humid area and it is protected and watched to make sure that it does not come into contact with water or any high humidity. And they have to go and harvest. They harvest this early on in the season, much earlier than the rest of the wheat, so that they can guard it adequately and so that it's not so that it ripens at the proper time, and all of the things that have to go into this. That's why shmura matzah is so expensive. It's not just that it's handmade, it's that the flour
that they use comes from the kernels that come from this wheat that is guarded. And it is a very meticulous process going back to ancient times, that it is actually shmura, it's actually guarded. Now, the Alter Rebbe here is sharing with us the mystical component. It has to be guarded because it's on this lower degree where we're still struggling with our negativity, and we have to push aside our negativity. And it's very easy, you know, when a person is battling with the Yetzer Hara, and then your spouse asks you for help, how might a normal human being react? They might, in an outburst of anger, they might, you know, they might react in not a good way. Well, that's not a very good way to battle your negative side, is it? Except when we're in that struggle, we have to be very guarded. We have to be very cautious. That's the mystical component. I want to get, for a moment, there's an amazing story. I know, Robert, you want to be in the text, and that's very good, but there's an unbelievable story connected to this guarded matzah. And this is a story that took place maybe a dozen years ago in Israel. Has anybody here heard the story? I don't think so. If you did, let me know. But you can find it on YouTube, and this is told by, I think, a colonel or a general of the IDF, not a religious man. And what's the story? The story is that there were a group of Chassidim who, because of various factors, so they had to go and they had to purchase their shmura matzah early on. They had to go, in other words, they had to find a field of wheat that was the right type of wheat, and that was the good wheat to use. And they went and they basically ended up harvesting it like a couple of months before the harvest for shmura matzah, for this matzah that we guard so meticulously, right? Now you have these drones or these balloons in those days going around in Israel looking for terrorists here and there, and they were looking over this field after the field had been harvested. And what did they find in this field? Out of this freshly harvested wheat field popped out terrorists from the tunnels underneath. And they did all of their things, rolling out and doing a somersault and going around here and there. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4. They're looking around like, where'd the wheat go? The wheat isn't supposed to be harvested for another 2 months. That was the first time that the IDF was able to find the tunnels that the PLO were digging to attack us. Wow. And this is told by an IDF official. This is not a religious guy telling the story. It's amazing. So my point over here is the matzah that we were guarding meticulously ended up meticulously guarding us.
Yeah.
You can look the story up and hear it from the IDF official. It's amazing. But anyway, moving right along. So we saw this level, getting back to the spiritual level. Listen, with the lives of Jewish people were saved tremendously. It could have been an absolute catastrophe that was averted because of shmura matzah. All right, so that is quite a story. But now we each still have to deal with our own animal soul, with our own negativity. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is talking about over here. The matzah before midnight has to be guarded so that it doesn't become leavened. And this refers to pride and haughtiness, since one is on the lower level of fear, right? So if a person overcomes his Yetzer Hara, he has impulse control and he controls himself, he might now become prideful because of that. And this person and his connection to God is based merely on faith that is lower than understanding and knowledge, so protection is required. This is, again, the lower level of matzah before midnight. And for this reason, the term matzos associated with this level is lacking a vav because it refers to an underdeveloped level. So the word is spelled, as they say, plenative. In Hebrew, you can spell it with a vav. Let me just show you so you'll understand, for those that aren't as familiar with the Hebrew language. But we can write it either matzot, that's the normal spelling, or matzot, okay? Now in Hebrew, the vav symbolizes, although this isn't a very good font to show it, but the vav actually starts with the yud on top and then draws down to the lower level. And yud is the first point of revelation. And then the Vav shows how that first point of revelation becomes drawn below to become revealed below. So the lower level of matzot, that we're, so to speak, on an unrevealed level, not a level of revelation, they're lacking the Vav. Also, when matzos is written without a Vav, it relates to the term, another term, which is matsusa, meaning strife, as in the expression of strife and controversy. Matzah umeriva, we find in the Torah. The word matzah could also mean strife. And this is the strife that occurs when we're on that lower, unprotected, unrevealed level. The controversy is a spiritual one, leading to the negation of one's self-concerns and pride, similar to what our sages say, a person should always incite the Yetzer Tov against the Yetzer Hara. And therefore, this matzah was eaten before midnight. So this was all the idea of the way that a human being has to, and this is, Robert, as you mentioned yesterday, every single day, this work of overcoming the evil inclination. He's always got a plan. he's always there trying to distract us or misguide us, right? To do something other than what the divine plan is. But now,
Rabbi, could I just add, there's a part of that in the late 1988 with the issue of the prisoners of conscience, the refuseniks in the Soviet Union. I was active in that activity, and we always had our Passover Seders, and the first matzah was always the matzah of hope, the hope that we translated that all Jews will be free. So there are also then contemporary as well as interpretations, again, what matzah means, not only in the past, but in the present as well, when Jews were held as slaves, if not slaves, captive in the godless Soviet Union. That's all.
Beautiful. And look, it worked.
Yeah.
It worked. We have other problems with the Soviet Union now today, but with Russia, but the Jewish people are able, any Jewish person who wants to celebrate a Passover Seder in Russia is allowed to without any problem. So Baruch Hashem, Robert, that your matzah of hope worked.
Yeah.
So in contrast, the second dimension of matzah was revealed after midnight, after the offering of the Paschal sacrifice, and after the King of Kings was revealed to them. So we spoke about last week. I just turning off the ringer of my phone here. Apologize. So as we spoke about yesterday, rather, so you had the idea of the matzah that was after midnight. That was the point where it says, Shenigla aleiham melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu uga'alam, that the Holy One, blessed be He, the King of all kings, became revealed upon them and redeemed them. And it was that revelation of the Or Ein Sof, of the infinite light of God, that was infused into this dough that would not allow, thus the dough could not rise. It could have no arrogance. It could have no self-absorption, because there was no self. There was just the Or Ein Sof. This is an absolute level of self-transcendence. So the intent of the Paschal sacrifice is to evoke, and this is, we're going to get to another play on words here. So I have some bad news for you. Well, it's not bad news, but I have a big problem with Passover. It's mistranslated. It's a mistranslation of the word Pasach. Now, Ben Sion is here, and he knows Hebrew, but I don't know that this word is really used. In Hebrew today, you would say kafatz, would be jumping.
Kafatz is jump.
Jump. But
Pasach is like passed over.
But Pasach doesn't really mean
or skip. Yeah, it could be
skipping, like leaping. Kafatz is jumping, like with two legs, and
Pasach is more like is leaping. I mean, it's a similar kind of a word as kafatz, but it's not simply passing over something, but it's jumping. It has a connotation of jumping.
Yeah, skip on it or something.
And the Alter Rebbe here is going to explain that the whole idea. Well, God, of course, was not jumping. He wasn't leaping. He wasn't skipping. God has no legs. He has no physical form. But it's the concept. It's the idea here. There's the way that God becomes manifest level by level. The idea of level by level would be what we would call walking. You're going step by step, right? Or even if you're going up a staircase, you're going up one step, then the next step, etc., right? Step by step. The idea of jumping shows that you're going beyond all of the step-by-step process, and this is referring to a level that is transcendent. That's the idea of the Korban Pesach. So God leaped over. So here he uses the word leap, right? God leaped over, literally this. So the name of the holiday should actually be called Leap Over, not Passover, as the translation here of Pasach Havaya, that God leaped over, leaping over the house of the Jews to save the firstborn from death. In a spiritual sense, this refers to drawing down godly influence that is beyond the whole spiritual cosmos. As we said, the spiritual cosmos is a whole system that's structured step by step, level by level. The idea of Pasach, of leaping over above and beyond, is the transcendent level that transcends all of the levels of the spiritual cosmos, going straight to the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light that transcends the spiritual cosmos. And this is the meaning of with great awe. This refers to the revelation of the divine presence, that is God's infinite light that utterly transcends the chain-like progression of spiritual existence. This dimension shined forth and was revealed in their godly souls of the Jewish people at that time. And this is what we mean in the Seder, that the King of all kings, okay, this gets a little bit Kabbalistic. We're going to skip over this next paragraph, but it's basically God going beyond. There are many different levels that are spoken about here. We're going to go down into page 8. It's all referring to the way that God is drawn down through the revelation of the level of King of Kings, meaning he's king is representing a level of the spiritual cosmos, but God is the King of Kings, meaning he's beyond all of the levels, the whole spiritual cosmos. I just want to explain this a little bit because I kind of rushed through it, and sometimes it's hard to absorb and internalize some of these ideas, but I've used the analogy before. So I think I've used this very analogy before. So imagine you have a philanthropist, and the philanthropist has a great love of children, and he decides to create a school. Now, in order to create that school, he has to find a spot. They have to build the building. He has to find the administrators. He has to find the teachers, et cetera, right? And in creating a school, you're going to end up with an entire hierarchy, correct? For any business, for any organization to run, it works best when you have a hierarchy. You have the one in charge. You have the
structure.
Right, infrastructure. And each person has their level, and they're accountable to the person above them, right? Now, who is when you look at the school, who is at the top of this hierarchy?
I don't know.
What?
It's been a while before I was in school.
You still know how a school is structured. Anna,
So it would be the principal.
the principal, right? The normal answer would be the principal of the school, or sometimes they have a director of a school that's above, or the dean, right?
The dean
is at the highest level of the hierarchy. But in the mind of this philanthropist, you know who's at the top of the hierarchy?
Him, definitely. His idea, no?
Not even him. At the top of the hierarchy are the children.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right? And in that way, that is another perspective. Now, does that mean that the principal has to give an accountability report to the children? Well, not exactly, right? But we understand in a certain way there are certain things that transcend the hierarchy. I'm just using this as an analogy. God has created an entire infrastructure. So whenever we're talking about the spiritual levels, you have the 4 worlds, you have the 10 sphirot, you have all of the various levels that interact. That's all the spiritual cosmos. That is all the spiritual hierarchy, which was necessary for bringing about existence and for us relating to God. But then you have aspects with the Torah and mitzvot, you have aspects that transcend the hierarchy. And that's what he's talking about over here. Matzot with a vav shows how we have that revelation from the infinite God above the spiritual hierarchy, above the spiritual cosmos that comes down and becomes revealed to the Jewish people. This level is manifest in the second level of matzah, which is eaten after midnight. For matzah is identified with bitul, which is self-transcendence. As explained above, the matzah eaten before midnight, by contrast, is identified with the lower level of fear. The lower level of fear is a great thing. The lower level of fear means the way that we have to contend with our evil inclination, right? We have to struggle and fight with it because he's always there doing his thing, right? And we have a fear of God, so we do it. That's the lower level of fear. And that's the matzah before midnight. But this higher level is associated with the attribute of faith, as it is enclosed in the levels below intellectual comprehension, as explained above. This child dimension has its parallel in our relationship with God, as it's written, when Israel was a youth, I loved him. And it's written, I remember the kindness of your youth and how you followed after me in the desert. So the verse connects this youth-like dimension of the Jewish people with the Exodus, when they showed a commitment to God based on simple faith. And as it's written, from the time of the Exodus from Egypt, I, God, have called my son, the Jewish people. God's expression of love for the Jewish people evoke a response on their part like a child calling Father. So we call out to our Father in heaven with a pure, simple attachment, a pure, simple faith. Oh, here, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. All of this is associated with the matzah eaten before midnight. So all of this is the matzah before midnight. Now we're going to turn to the matzah after midnight. The matzah eaten after midnight, however, is identified with a true bittul and sublime awe. So before we spoke about a bittul before. There's 2 levels of bittul. There's 2 levels of impulse control. One level of impulse control is simply, I want to eat the second piece of cake, or I want to eat the piece of cake, and I don't. I find something else to do. I distract myself with something else. I push it aside, right? I don't eat it, right? And did I transcend the desire? No, not at all. I just moved on to something else. So that's impulse control. Somebody wants to share some lashon hara, some negative speech about somebody, and say, I don't want to hear it. I want to hear it, but I don't want to hear it, right?
Not supposed to hear it.
I'm not supposed to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I'm just going to control myself, right? Who here ever had the experience of exercising and loving it?
I think most of us, right?
Yeah.
There are times when you get out running or swimming or whatever, and you're into it, and boy, does it feel great. However, when you start exercising, that's not always the experience, right? You have to force yourself to do it. You have to force yourself to do it. So the lower level bittul is where we're forcing ourselves to follow God's will. The higher level bittul is where we feel the presence of the infinite light of God and we become self-transcendent. We remove all of our resistance. All of our resistance to godliness is just removed because we sense the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God. This is similar to maybe how we might feel sometimes on Yom Kippur, you know? Yom Kippur, okay, you know, we're not in the mood of sinning. We don't want to sin. We might not even, until maybe the end of the fast, we might not even be hungry because we're in a state of self-transcendence. And this is the true bittul. This is before there was a bittul meaning pushing ourselves aside, but that was what you'd call, what they call white knuckling. You know, I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. You want to do it, but you're not going to do it, right? The higher level of bittul is I'm beyond that. I'm at this point of realizing the infinitude of God. And this is the matzah eaten after midnight. It's associated, it's identified with true bittul and sublime awe that are drawn down from a level of one's connection to God that transcends intellectual comprehension. At the time of the Exodus, this level illumined their souls. That is, the revelation of God's infinite light that transcended the spiritual cosmos shined upon them at that time from above downward as an arousal from above, meaning it was God's gift to us. And as we said yesterday, that's why the dough could not rise. It didn't have to be guarded. The dough could not rise. There could be no haughtiness. There could be no pride. You know, imagine that you're standing in the Beit HaMikdash before the holy sanctuary, right, of God, of God's revealed presence in the world. There is no me. I am totally, my whole self, there is no pride, right? That's the matzah, that's the dough. After midnight, it could not rise. And that's what is meant with great awe. As we say in the Haggadah, this refers to the revelation of the divine presence, the level of matzah associated with such a revelation does not need to be guarded against the leavening whose spiritual parallel are the traits of self-concern and pride, since the external powers have no foothold and cannot receive nurture from this level at all because it's a transcendent level. On this basis, we can appreciate the intent of the quote, the dough of our ancestors did not have the opportunity to rise before the King of Kings, etc., was revealed to them. This refers to the second level of matzah, where there is no possibility of leavening at all because of the awesomeness of the revelation of the King of Kings to them. On that level, there can be no nurture or foothold for the external forces identified with self-concern, yesh, and pride, which are called chametz. And this is the meaning of the verse. They baked the dough that they took out of Egypt as cakes of matzah because kilo chametz, because it did not leaven. It couldn't leaven.
After baking.
Well, it's a whole discussion of what this verse means. It's a complicated story. According to many opinions, they were actually taking dough out of Egypt and they baked it in Sukkot.
Oh.
When they first got to Sukkot, and since they were traveling, the dough wasn't rising, and here we're saying it wasn't rising because of the spirituality. They actually baked it later. Others say no, they baked it already, as you say. So there are different opinions about how to understand this in actuality. But the spiritual meaning is it couldn't leaven because of the revelation of God. And this is the matzah, ladies and gentlemen, that we eat at the Seder, you see. It's not just symbolizing this level, it is this very level, if we want it to be. And as we spoke about yesterday, it's all in our head. It's all in our head. And therefore, in their journey from Egypt to Ramses, as it says in the Torah, they went from Egypt to Ramses, although it was hurried. When adding the time it took to light fires in order to bake the dough certainly rested more than the time necessary for it to become chametz. So the Rebbe here, this is a little, again, the Rebbe here is going with the idea that they were taking the dough and they were going to bake it somewhere else, and there was enough time for it to become chametz. Nevertheless, it didn't become chametz because of the above reason. So according to all of these opinions that say that they actually went out with ugot, they went out with the dough and they baked it later. Well, wouldn't it have risen during their journey? So the Rebbe is saying it didn't rise because this was all the time of the revelation of the Or Ein Sof, of God's infinite light. Accordingly, in this instance, matzot is written with the full spelling, including a vav, because as we said above, that shows the yud, which is the point of revelation, now becomes revealed below. That's the vav. So now as matzot is written with a vav. It just shows us, by the way, how exact every letter in the Torah is. You know, sometimes it's written with a vav, without a vav, and for the person who is untrained, he might look and say, oh, well, it doesn't really make a difference. We see over here, the Rebbe is explaining, no, these are two totally different levels of matzot. So he goes back to talking about the lower level of fear identified. I'm skipping up a couple of paragraphs. The lower level of fear is identified with the matzos written without a vav, therefore it must be protected from the external forces. The second level of matzah, by contrast, is written with a full spelling, including a vav, which does not require protection. Even as they were traveling out of Egypt, ki lo chametz, it did not become leavened. And now we can answer some of our previous questions, the Alter Rebbe says, getting back to from the beginning of the discourse. On this basis, we can offer a resolution to the question raised above. Why do we say that the matzah we eat before midnight is eaten? Because the dough of our ancestors did not have the opportunity to rise. Seemingly, the dough not rising refers to the second aspect and dimension of the matzah that was not manifest until after midnight. Yet when the Jews were first eating in Egypt, the first night, it was before midnight. Again, historically, the very first time the Jews ate the matzah of the mitzvah was the night of Passover, before the slaying of the firstborns, before the revelation of God, before the exodus from Egypt. So why do we say when we sit at the Seder that we're eating this because the dough of our ancestors did not have the opportunity to rise? So now the Rebbe is going to answer that question. Concept explains the entire rationale why this level could be revealed only after midnight resulted from the fact that before the Exodus, the Jewish people were in Egypt. So the very first year, they were in Egypt. And they were, he says here, they were affected by the constraints on the revelation of godliness associated with that land. And furthermore, the Torah and mitzvot were not yet given to them. Therefore, they were unable to receive the vast revelation of great awe, which would bring them to the level of bittul and sublime fear before midnight. Okay. You would think that we eat now. This is a simple idea, but it's, you know, sometimes words, when you add words to a simple idea, it sounds complicated. simply put, the Jews, let's say this is before midnight and this is after midnight, my face being midnight. So when the Jews originally ate the matzah before midnight, right? They were on a level of being in Egypt and being constricted, okay? Then you had the matzah that was eaten after midnight, which was the higher, much higher level. It could not turn into chametz. The Rebbe explains that this level of matzah, we don't eat this matzah today. You know why? Because every Passover Seder, we're always post midnight. The reason being, because we've received the Torah. Since we've received the Torah at Mount Sinai and we are able to rise above the level of Egypt, we're no longer eating the matzah of before midnight. We're always eating the matzah of after midnight. So when we're sitting down before midnight at our Seder, and by the way, according to some opinions, you have to eat the matzah before midnight. The afikomen, for instance, some people are very careful. In Chabad, we're careful the first night to make sure we eat the afikomen before midnight. Others are careful both nights. Some people are probably not careful at all. Most people want to get to bed already. But the Rebbe says, even when we're eating the matzah before midnight, it's post-midnight matzah because we've received the Torah. That's the point that he's making here. Therefore, they were in Egypt. They were unable to receive the vast revelation of great awe that would bring them to the level of bittul and sublime fear before midnight because they didn't have the Torah yet. Instead, before midnight, they were able to relate to the level of matzot, lacking the vav. So they had matzot without a vav, the lower level of revelation. That requires a person to negate his will. The preliminary service, however, enabled them to receive after midnight the higher revelation prescribed above. In other words, this level prepared them to be able to receive the higher level after midnight. And in consequence, an unlimited dimension of godliness was drawn down to them, preventing their dough from becoming leavened. But now what about today? Why are we eating matzah? In contrast, after we received the Torah and the mitzvot at Mount Sinai, now we have the potential to draw down godliness through Torah and mitzvahs throughout the entire year. Even before Pesach, we can do this. Therefore, in this matzah, which we eat before midnight, we can, through the observance of Torah and mitzvahs that we've done the whole previous year, receive the revelation of the divine presence, a level equivalent to the revelation of the King of Kings that took place after midnight on the original Pesach. In other words, we're always eating post-midnight matzot because we have the Torah. And the Rebbe goes into explaining this just briefly, that through the observance of Torah and its mitzvos, the 620 pillars of light from the sublime Keser are drawn down. So we may as well read it in the note here. As explained in Tanya, so you have Keser. Keser means the crown, the level that transcends the spiritual cosmos. Okay, it's called Keser, or in modern Hebrew it would be Keter, right?
Yes.
And it refers to the inner dimension of God's will, a level of godliness that transcends intellect, just as the crown is worn above the head. So Keser is numerically equivalent to 620, which means the sum of the 613 mitzvot of scriptural origin and the 7 mitzvot of rabbinic origin. So 613 plus 7 equals 620, which is the numeric value of Keter. The mitzvos are described as pillars because just as a pillar extends from the roof to the ground, these mitzvos draw down from this transcendent spiritual level to our material earth. They're mamish pillars, or maybe we'd call them cables. This parallels the concept that
that the King of Kings was revealed to them, meaning the level that is beyond the spiritual cosmos now became revealed. Therefore, the qualities that were revealed to them at that midnight, which was the time of divine favor, are drawn down to us in the matzah that we eat nowadays before midnight. For we possess Torah and mitzvahs the entire year, which constitute the essence of the sublime will. And now we're going to get back to the statement in the Haggadah. This is the intent of the statement of the Haggadah. This matzah that we eat, what is the reason? We say in the Hebrew, right? Matzah zu sha'anu ochlim al shum ma. The meaning of the question is, it can be understood that when the Jews were in exile, not only were they enslaved physically, they were spiritually in exile, very much under the influence of klipa and sitra achra, under the forces of evil, of negativity. And since they did not possess the Torah and the mitzvahs, they were commanded to eat matzah before midnight. Although this matzah lacked avav, it was matzot that were lacking, symbolizing a lesser level of divine light. It served as a preparatory step for the Jews, enabling them afterwards to receive the great revelation described above. We, by contrast, have already been given the Torah and its mitzvahs. So if so, of what purpose is our eating the matzah before midnight? So the Rebbe is explaining this whole thing on a mystical dimension. Why do we need to eat matzot before midnight? We understand the Jews in Egypt had to do this because they were lacking Torah and mitzvah. But now that we have Torah and mitzvah through the whole year, drawing the keter, the crown of God's supernal will from above, drawing it down below into this world. So why do we need these matzot before midnight altogether? That's the question the Alter Rebbe is asking. The resolution is implied by the phrase, because the dough of our ancestors did not have the opportunity. The intent is that our eating of matzah, even though it is before midnight, nonetheless draws down not only the first level of matzah, but also the second level, the level associated with bittul. So he's basically saying the same thing that he's been saying until now, but he's putting it into the words of the Haggadah. Why do we need the matzah before midnight? Because we're eating the matzah before midnight that's really post-midnight matzah. The matzah that we're eating before midnight are because God revealed himself. When the Jews were in Egypt, did God reveal himself before midnight? No. But the matzah that we're eating, we're saying, is because God himself was revealed. And that's the matzah that we're eating. So we're all on a post-midnight matzah experience. we're saying that in the Haggadah. Why are we eating matzah before midnight? Good question. We shouldn't have to. Say no, because these matzot are with a vav. And that's the basic idea here. So we're going to stop at this section of the mimer. That actually brings us right to the end. Robert, we finished. How did that happen? Because you started us off.
You did it. Thank you.
I want.
Yeah, please.
Sorry. Can I make a little comment that just for some reason it continuously coming to my mind when you were talking about the difference between the first and second level of matzah. When you listen to a foreign language and you really don't understand the meaning of it, but just to listen to it, it's like a matzah in the first level, gets you prepared for the completely different experience that you have when you understand the language. And when you live in this country and you speak the language for, a number of years, then it's probably very difficult to come back and to put yourself in a situation where you were just simply listening to a sound without understanding it. That's why, to me, I think that first and second level of matzah is kind of very similar to this process.
Interesting. Could be. Interesting comparison. The main thing is, of course, to make sure that we eat the matzot. And like I said yesterday, this was a very big project of the Rebbe to make sure that people had the special shmura matzah. And I would like to encourage everybody here to make sure that you get the shmura matzah.
I got mine.
You've got yours already, and to maybe even reach out if you have friends where you live or around the world. There's always a Chabad not too far away, and encourage, maybe call the Chabad rabbi and tell them you have a friend who lives there. He would appreciate some shmura matzah, and we can all become part of this. To what would we do? How can you increase the faith of the Jewish people? I think that is the primary objective of the Rebbe has been. How can we increase the amunah, the faith of the Jewish people? So it's not surprising that he found this idea and promoted this idea of eating matzah, shmura matzah on Passover, making sure that everybody's getting this shmura matzah to increase the faith of the Jewish people.
Because he knew that in Russia, the people that were in jail didn't have the matzahs.
Yeah.
Or had a hard time getting it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everybody in Russia was in jail in Soviet Union.
Yeah, Soviet Union.
And yeah. We have a few minutes. I just would like to also wish everybody a Chodesh Tov, a wonderful new month of Nisan. Today is one of the most amazing days in the Jewish calendar, and a lot of people are unaware. I mean, it's Rosh Chodesh, all right. Well, there's 12 of those per year. One of them we make a big deal out of. That's Rosh Hashanah. But what about Rosh Chodesh Nisan? So we learned a discourse several months ago that when Moshe built the Mishkan and God's presence came back into the Mishkan, God said, I've come to my garden, Bati Legani, I've come to my main place where God had been away from for 2,448 years, from since he created the world. He was here, but then he departed through the sins. Now he came back in. When did God come back into the world? When did the divine presence find a home in this world? On Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That was the day that the Mishkan was initiated. And every day, another prince from another tribe brought another sacrifice for the first 12 days of Nisan to dedicate the temple. So this is a very special day. And in fact, it is so special that it says that the one who brought the offering on the first day was Nachshon, the son of Aminadav. So why should it say Bayom Harishon? It should have said Bayom Rishon, the one bringing the offering on. You wouldn't say in Hebrew necessarily the first day. You would say first day, Bayom Rishon. Why the?
Rishon is Sunday.
Right, but here we're talking about the first day of the dedication of the temple.
Right.
Okay. So why would we say the first day by Yom Harishon? Well, it's quite amazing what the Medrash says. The Medrash says that when God first created the world, the first day was not called the first day. The first day of creation in the Torah is called Yom Echad, meaning, Ben Sion?
1 day.
Day one, right?
Day one.
Yom Echad, day one. But it wasn't called Yom Rishon. It wasn't called the rest of the days. You have the second day, the third day, Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi'i, etc. The first day was not called the first day. And the Medrash says that God did not call it the first day because he was waiting for the first day of Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, when the Mishkan would be dedicated, And now God's presence would be manifest in the world through human effort. And this is Bayom Rishon, because God wants a home in the lowest realm. The truth is, when God first created the world, it wasn't the lowest realm, because it wasn't a human being creating this, but rather that we have to go through the whole process of the sins and the difficulty and all of the trials and tribulations. But eventually, God takes us out of Egypt. We build the Mishkan, and God finds a home in this world. This is called Yom Harishon. This is the first day. So it's funny. And all of the days of creation, where is the first day? The first day is actually Rosh Chodesh Nisan, 2,448 years later. So just a little thought on Rosh Chodesh Nisan.
Nice vote.
Okay, well, I wish everyone a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. You should have a happy and a kosher Passover, and healthy and joyous in all things. And we will see you, I guess, after the Pesach holiday, after the break.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye all.
Bye-bye.